love book, Two Bobbies. This is a true story of Hurricane Katrina, friendship, and survival. Two Bobbies, a true story of Hurricane Katrina, friendship, true survival. Author, Mary Larson and Marty Nethery, illustrated by Jean Cassels. Neither Bobby, the dog, nor Bob, cat, has a tail. And some say that's actually what brought them together. No one really knows for sure how they met. Perhaps their owner had a soft spot in her heart for pets with no tails. But the two Bobbies, as they've now been come to know, were exactly the friend that each other needed at exactly the right time. This is their true story. The city of New Orleans on the mighty Mississippi is a place where many people and pets call home. Jamming with jazz and dressing up fancy for Mardi Gras, it bustled from day into night. But on August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina bore down on the city and everyone who lived there, including a little wisp of a cat and one puppy. In that hurricane, winds roared to 110 miles an hour. Rain pounded hard and fast. Strong winds pushed walls of water from the Gulf of Mexico into Lake Pontchartrain. Some of the levees that held back the lake, they broke and gave way. Water poured into New Orleans deeper and deeper. People who had stayed there through the storm were finally forced to just leave their homes. They had to say goodbye to everything they loved. Many were told, you can't even take your pets. Bobby and Bob cats were left behind. Bobby had been tethered or tied up with a long length of chain. Bob cat stayed right by her side. Together in the silent heat, they waited for help to come. After the storm, volunteers from across the country came to New Orleans to lend a hand. They brought food and water. They rescued people stranded way up on the roofs of their homes, and they rescued many animals. But with so much damage and so much confusion, the two Bobbies weren't rescued. Their food and their water was gone, and Bobby the dog finally broke free. She dragged along the broken chain with Bobcat close to her side. In the early days after the hurricane, the two Bobbies tried to make their way around oily water littered with debris. After the waters receded, they traveled the buckled streets with no place to call home. Month after month passed as Bobby and Bob Cat wandered around the devastated city of New Orleans. Their days and nights were filled with danger. Packs of hungry, homeless dogs roamed the streets, fighting the smaller animals for food. Were Bobby and Bobcat chased away from any of the scraps that they might have found? With little food to eat or clean water to drink, Bobby's ribs began to show, and Bobcat's brown sugar markings started to fade away to dull white. One day in January, 4 long months later, Bobby and Bobcat strayed onto a job site. A construction crew hammered and sawed, fixing up a motel damaged by the hurricane. A worker's dog rushed over to play with Bobby. The dog's owner, Rich, noticed Bobcat too. He saw how thin those 2 strays were, and he began feeding them. He trimmed Bobby's chain, leaving enough to jingle on the ground, because Bobcat liked to follow that sound. But every time Rich tried to touch Bobcat, Bobby the dog would growl. After a week of caring for the 2 Bobbies, Rich got some bad news when his boss came to the job site. He had been given permission for 1 dog, not 2 dogs, and certainly not a cat. He said Bobby and Bobcat, they had to go. Rich was determined to take them to a safe place, but Bobby still growled whenever Rich got too near Bobcat. She would not let him pick up or even touch her friend, so Rich rattled a bowl full of kibble or dog food. Bobby followed the food to Rich's van, and Bobcat followed Bobby. Rich drove them to a temporary shelter that Best Friends Animal Society had set up in Celebration Station. It was a former video game arcade. You see, the shelter was completely filled with homeless dogs and cats after the hurricane, but a volunteer welcomed them in, even naming them Bobby and Bobcat because of their bobbed tails. But they were placed in separate rooms. All night long, Bobby howled and barked. Bobcat paced back and forth. No one could keep asleep with Bobby making such a ruckus. So volunteers made a large pen for her and put Bobcat in his smaller carrier inside Bobby's new cage. Bobby lay in front of Bobcat and whimpered. The volunteers opened the small cage to see what would happen next. The 2 Bobbies touched noses. Together again at last. For the next few minutes, the volunteers studied Bobby and Bobcat. They noticed how Bobcat stayed so close to Bobby. They saw how he walked with his neck stuck out and how carefully he lifted his front paws, placing them down as if he were unsure of what he might step on. Someone waved a hand in front of Bobcat's face. Bobcat didn't jump back. Another volunteer waved her hand. Bobcat didn't even blink. Everyone was stunned. Bobcat was blind. All that time on their own, Bobby, the dog, had been Bobcat's seeing eye companion. The volunteers and even an ace pet detective searched for their family with no success. 1 month later, Celebration Station closed its doors, but Bobby and Bobcat still did not have a home. There was only one other thing left to try. The 2 Bobbies made an appearance, a television appearance, on CNN's Anderson Cooper's 360. The very next day, the Best Friends volunteer left New Orleans. One of them drove Bobby and Bobcat to the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in the state of Utah, where they would stay until a new family could be found. They were on their way out west when the news came in. Hundreds of people wanted to adopt them both. Well, it would take a very special family to adopt them together. The volunteers made a list and invited everyone come on in and meet these two Bobbies. Only Melinda and her Boston Terrier, Gus Gus, made the long trip to Utah. That night, Bobby and Bob Cat had a sleepover with Melinda and Gus Gus in one of her cottages on the sanctuary grounds. Do you think the two Bobbies would choose Melinda? The next morning, everyone knew the answer. Bobby and Bob Cat were stuck to Melinda like Velcro. They also liked Gus Gus, and he liked them. Finally, Bobby and Bob Cat had found their new family. Now, they live with Melinda, Gus Gus, and Amelia on a ranch in southern Oregon. Bob Cat has a window seat to sit in. He likes to play with the robot vacuum cleaner. He turns it on all by himself. Bobby helps with the ranch chores. She goes along on horse rides. On hot days, she lounges in the frog and fairy pond. At the end of every day, Bobby and Bob Cat still snuggle up together. They have toys and treats and lots of new friends. They even have a camel as a friend. But best of all, they have each other. That's the true story of the two Bobbies. And after the storm, like thousands of others, the two Bobbies lost their family and everything dear to them when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. After they came to live with Melinda and Gus Gus, their veterinarian discovered debris and grit deep inside Bob Cat's ear canals. His right eardrum had been broken. Did Bobby snatch Bob Cat away from the dirty floodwaters that had filled New Orleans? No one will ever know. But it's very likely that a blind cat like Bob Cat would not have made it without Bobby's protection. In turn, Bob Cat's friendship may have made Bobby the dog stronger and given her a reason to go on. Bobby and Bob Cat survived Hurricane Katrina, and they did it by lending each other a paw.